Hello and welcome again to the GigCX Decoded podcast. We are diving deeper into the world of GigCX or gig-based customer service, brought to you by Limitless. I have to say we are, of course, the leading GigCX platform. And I'm your host. I'm the Chief Sales Officer here at the good ship Limitless. GigCX, for those that are unfamiliar with the term, is about enabling organizations to route digital inquiries to crowds of often customers, and they get rewarded for answering inquiries on a per outcome or per gig basis. That's what GigCX is all about. And our mission is to help educate the customer service world, give them a bit more information about it. And then through the course of that, what we're doing is bringing on some cleverer people than myself onto the show to start talking to them about their expertise. And today, I am very excited to bring on, I don't know what to call you, Paul. Is it the godfather of gig? Is it the originator of gig, the guru of gig? Because you are gig, man. This is you.
Well, I appreciate that. I'm just trying to figure things out. And one day I reached out to a freelancer. By the way, he's still working with me to this day, and it changed my view of the way work should be done. And I haven't let go of it. And I'm trying to, as best I can, share the opportunities and educate people, whether it's their careers or their businesses, about the possibility of working with a distributed global workforce.
There we go. Right. Well, so I've got a little script here that my producer kindly. So I'm going to read it out. You tell me how good this is about a summary of you. So this is Paul Estes, the founder of Expert Link AI, the best-selling author of the Gig Mindset book, which I've read, by the way. In fact, I thought I had it here, but someone must have taken it home because I'm in the office today. And we've got a whole bunch of books on this industry stuff. And yours has been here. It's not been propping a table up. It's actually been here, and people have been reading it. And 20 years in the industry, driving leadership roles in Microsoft, Amazon, and Dell. You've got your own, massive readership, 100,000 readers. That's nearly as much as mine. And your LinkedIn newsletter, insights across the board in Fast Company, TechCrunch, Forbes, and you're a keynote speaker and panelist. I mean, you've got some amazing accolades there, but all these sort of podcasts and these speeches you do. They're gigs, right? That's the nature of what you're doing. You get to choose the keynotes and the speeches you do, and we're very fortunate today you've chosen this one. But that's the nature of business. Anything else you want to add to that list of accolades?
No, I just each one of those I remember how much work each one of them was. So I appreciate the intro.
Good stuff. Okay, well, so we're going to go into a bit more detail about GigCX. Now, your background, as I understand it, and you can correct me wrong, is covering gig across the whole industry and why any organisation needs to adopt this sort of mindset. Hence your book. Our industry, what we do is all in the customer service industry. So we'll play around a bit, go across areas, but we'll keep it kind of linked to our part of the industry as well. So, do you want to give any more intro on yourself and your background before we get into some of the questions?
No, I think you covered it well.
We're okay. Fine, let's do it. Right. So let's get into some of the big one to start with. So I've got a few questions, but what I thought we'd start with, actually, it's a bit of a curveball, but everyone loves a curveball every now and again, is some of the sort of myths and people, because gig has got a stigma, right, in the industry. Now, I would wager that at a minimum 75% of the people listening to this podcast have been a consumer of gig of some description, either food delivery, taxi rides, or Airbnb, or whatever it is. There's some form of trade-off between somebody wanting a service and someone turning up and then being able to do it. What they may not have realized behind the scenes is that's what gig is. And there's a lot of misunderstanding in the world. So there's a few common myths that I think I see quite often. The first one is about quality, right? Because gig can often, people say, well, if people aren't employed to do the work, then the quality must be rubbish. What's your perspective on that?
Well, first, I think it's a really good question, because I think a lot of people misunderstand what the term actually means. And
right.
Of course, to your point, go back to an Uber or Lyft or something like that. When we think of independent labor, just people that aren't employed by a traditional company, that's globally, that's almost a $5 trillion market. So
Wow.
when you talk about people that are independently employed, it's not a small part of the global economy. And when we talk about the gig economy, we are talking about the digital transformation of that labor, right? And so the first place we saw sort of product market fit was with Uber and some of the delivery on the B2C side. But that's not new in technology. I mean, the first part of consumer adoption of cell phones was the iPhone. And then every consumer brought their personal phone, to the company, and the IT person had to then adopt the idea
Right.
that bring your own phone thing versus, let me give you a phone. So we've seen lots of trends in the consumer space start to greatly influence how work is done and then how products are created. So that's the first thing when you understand the digital transformation of independent labor. It's not just these sort of niche places. We're starting to see a lot of places where it's really revolutionizing industries. The one that I use often to help people is telemedicine. So when we talk about, gig economy, people are low skilled workers or they don't work at the company. There's a company here, Teladoc, and I use their service and I talk about it quite often. The doctor on the other end of the FaceTime with me is an independent worker, is for all practical purposes a gig worker. And so we're starting to see doctors, lawyers, and better help, whether psychologists and well-trained, highly paid people lean into this digital transformation of certain industries. And so I try to expand people's understanding of the gig economy. It's not just your Upwork and Fivers. It's not just the work that you guys are doing over at Limitless on the CX and the support side. But it's happening in every industry. You can look at LegalZoom and see what's happening with lawyers. You can look at Notarize and see how the notary industry, you head down to in the US, down to the UPS store or somewhere and find a notary to notarize our documents. And now you press a button and it's all done on a platform with an independent notary on the other side. And so I hope that's a helpful way to sort of look at the technology and the revolution that's going on as the cloud and mobile becomes, standard place.
Cool. Thanks for that, Paul. So the other thing that we see is organizations. So what you described there was a lot of consumer. It's sort of driven by the consumer world, and then it ends up in the sort of corporate world and the from B2C in that respect. Organizations thinking this is about exploitation of the workforce, i.e. it's about how I can get a race to the bottom in terms of cost without having to pay people the additional add-ons and benefits and everything like that. That's often the biggest challenge, an objection that we get, or the biggest sort of, it's that word association game. Someone says gig and people go, it's that. It's like you're just abusing a workforce and all of that. But I'm really interested in your perspective from the other side in terms of the level of demand there is from that flexible workforce and how that's rising. How do you put that together?
Yeah. So first, let's talk about this to buy into to understand that argument. The first thing you have to say is, if I work at a company, then everything's perfect. It's a great experience, and we see time and time again that the burnout, the layoffs, all of the things, the workplace surveillance, all of the things that are going on in corporations, there is very low engagement, and call it quiet quitting, call it resting investing, call it what you want. And so be careful in making the comparison that one is bad and the other is good. That's right. The first thing I would say. They both have benefits and they both have challenges. And so that's the first thing is understand, because a lot of what I hear, having lived in both worlds, both being employed at large corporations and being independent, is the corporate people say, oh, well, it's really bad over there for the independent. And the independent people say, man, I'd never go and do that. And so when you live in both of those worlds, you get a little different perspective. I do think that especially here in the US, where our benefits are tied to a traditional job and an employer, it becomes really challenging to do independent work. And so I do think that there's a discussion, and is being had right now with all the lawsuits that are going on, trying to figure out, the true definition of worker classification and what that means. We just have what I would consider a very broken system, because I believe in the U.S., if you gave everybody, the health benefits that you have in the UK, a lot of people would be doing independent work.
Right.
The other thing is, I think companies are starting to be socially responsible in how they look at their independent workforces, right? We saw this happen in manufacturing, right? There was a time when Apple and others were getting in trouble overseas by the race to the bottom and some of the labor practices and things that you saw at the various facilities. And so I think that companies in general now are trying to figure out, what is fair pay for fair work. And so I think, like I said, both sides have challenges, but it's not a race for the bottom. You always pay. My dad told me many things, but you always pay for what you get.
Yeah. And I mean, I can, I was talking on, I think it was actually one of the other episodes, but I think there's a fundamental difference between somebody choosing to do the work and someone feeling obligated to do the work because they've got a salary, and that exchange for your time and your resources, and to bring this into our world, if you, contact centers agents are often, they're paid minimum wages. It's often an entry job for people, but the demands on them are huge, right? Because if customer service goes wonky for an organization, the ramifications are huge. So they're under huge amounts of pressure. So they're like, do the most amazing job you possibly can, but we need you to be working to this level of optimization, because if we get that wrong, i.e. if you're not working, traditionally it's about 80%, 65 to 80% sort of occupancy. So if someone's employed to work 8 hours a day, they know they're productive for 80% of that time. So they're like days are planned out in like 15-minute increments. They get these adherence schedules, and it's like, this is what I've got to do. And that was my first ever job in a contact center, and I remember those those schedules and that time, and the burnout it creates. But you don't have a relationship with the work. It's just work. You're just there, like you feel like you're on a machine line. You're just on a conveyor belt. Whereas the differences between independent workers is they have to choose the work that they want to do. So their relationship with that task is very different, and therefore the relationship and the outcome is often different. And that's the biggest challenge. When we look back at the history of Limitless and where we founded. So Roger and Megan, who founded the business, used to run massive outsourcers. The biggest issue they had was attrition. It was like, we've got to spend all this money to find the people. We've got to invite them in to do all this. Then we've got to make them productive in terms of giving them all the skills and the training on everything, because you've got to show them all of the IT systems. Here's all of the stuff you're going to use. Here's how you navigate yourself around the building, and it takes you 6 weeks to become productive. And then you're paid minimum wages. We're going to work you like a dog. And then 6 months you go somewhere else for 50 cents an hour more, and then you go again, and you just constant merry-go-round, and that drives this this perpetual attrition and the and the lack of quality in it. But the flip side to that, from what you talk about in the rise of this, the independent worker or the freelancer status, is that difference between people saying, I really want to work in this way, versus I'm just paid a salary to work in this way.
Well, there's a couple of things. One, yes, in the current world that I live in, I get to choose who I want to work with. And that autonomy to choose the work I want to do and who I want to work with is a big benefit. The other thing is that you have a lot of independent workers that have portfolio careers, right? So independent workers, have a portfolio career. It's not called a side hustle or moonlighting. If you're in a large company or a medium-sized company, the HR policies really do not allow moonlighting or side hustling. Yeah. The learning is, I signed up for, Coursera or LinkedIn Learning, and here's your learning track. It's like, well, that's not how I learn. It's like, well, that's not tough. And so, you're not allowed to have a professional persona, really outside the bounds of your employment and the strategies of the company. And so I worked on a lot of projects that failed, right? And spent lots of years on projects that failed. And I learned some things. But I didn't have the opportunity to go and say, well, I want to do something on the side and try to learn while I'm doing this. It's a very constricted, from a policy perspective, environment. And so I think one of the benefits that we see of independent work is, hey, today I might be spending 20 hours a week doing call center work or this kind of work. I might be doing some other engagements, and that creates a type of resiliency that I think a lot of people going forward. I know in generations behind Generation X, people expect. They don't expect to be held captive in a job for 20 years.
Yeah, I was I was just thinking, my daughter's 8, right, and when she gets to 18 and goes into the workforce, and I was saying, so Daddy used to sit in a building for 9 hours a day, and he used to travel an hour and a half to go in, an hour and a half to come back, and I can just imagine her saying, well, why would you do that? Like, it's just crazy. But
I've thought a lot about. I struggle with the binary nature of the discussion right now. When you talk about, and we were talking, you're in the London office today on Friday. I think there was a stage of your career, and Scott Galloway on the Pivot talks about this a lot. I think there was a stage of your career, or at least of my career, in the early days when I was at Dell and we were working insane hours. We're going there and learning and cutting your teeth and understanding how organizations run, how business runs, the camaraderie and stuff are extremely important. And I think, had I had the beginning of my career kind of sitting in and staring at Zoom and stuff and trying to understand business and understand technology, it would have been extremely hard. So I don't think it's binary. I think companies are trying to figure out, what hybrid actually means and how you create that human connection. But I also believe that going there 5 days a week during traffic hours, that magical things happen at the water coolers, because most of the water coolers I went with were filled with people I wanted to avoid, not with people that were doing the innovative work. So I think there's arguments on both sides, but I don't think it's as binary.
Okay. So you've talked a lot in your book, I think, around the sort of rise of the non-employee workforce. What I mean, there's probably some big obvious trends out, but in your perspective, what is it that's really driving that?
Well, look, you talked about it earlier. We look at companies like Google or other companies; they have more independent workers working in their ecosystem than they do employees. So there's this myth out here that I forgot the exact numbers for Google, but there's a myth here that they're not in these ecosystems, and they are. And so it's not that it's actually here, and it's getting bigger. The same HR departments that are trying to retain you and do all of this stuff about employees is the same HR departments working on layoffs, moving people to independent work for cost savings reasons or for agility and flexibility reasons. You hire an employee today and the world changes, like the onboarding cost and the offboarding cost of that employee is extremely expensive, and business is changing, now faster than ever. And it's not just a cliche, it's actually happening. And so you have to be agile. And so we're starting to see companies say, hey, I need different types of talent. One, that talent may not want to work for me in a captive situation. Right. So right now, if you do NFTs and a company wants to hire NFT experts, they're not probably going to come work for you in a captive, but they will come and consult or work in an independent way. The other thing is companies are trying to reduce cost, and that's just the fact of capitalism and the fact of the way businesses operate, and independent labor provides both agility and cost savings. And by the way, you can get access to better talent. The argument of are all freelancers low quality, I would argue, say, hey, is the best and the brightest actually working for you? Because right now you probably require them to be within 50 miles of your location.
Exactly.
So this argument that, hey, we have the best people, but these other people are probably low quality, I really struggle with, because the best people are not, often the ones that are within 50 miles of your location, and we'll talk a little bit about diversity in a minute, or the ones that want to come move to where your location is for cultural reasons or reasons. I live here in Seattle. I was born and raised in New Orleans, Louisiana. And today, if offered a job in Seattle coming from New Orleans, it would be really hard to make that move with my family. just because of the sheer cost difference of those two locations.
Yeah, right. I mean, that's an interesting point, because one of the attributes of the contact center industry is, people being, I sort of talk about this difference between, before you used to bring the people to the work, now you can take the work to the people because of technology is a great medium for that. But also it opens up, the differences in the workforce. Now, going back to the point about quality and this sort of people perceiving that there is a difference in the, if they're freelancer, they can't possibly be as good as somebody who I've got in a job role because they're doing a job right. But we so part of the report that we do each year, because we're genuinely interested, but
By the way, I just want to say it's a great report. So it's one of the things that I include in the newsletter, and I look forward to it. I've been reading it ever since I met the Limitless team, I think 4 years ago. So it's
right. Yeah.
Who's listening, who has not had the opportunity to read it, I really recommend picking it up if you're interested in this space.
Excellent. I love a plug. Thank you. So we do we survey people like yourselves. We survey a bunch of the industry leaders that are our customers, but we also survey a massive bunch of the gig experts themselves, and we figure out who are they, where do they live, what qualifications have they got, what languages do they speak, why do they gig, what do they think is good about it, do they still want to do it, and huge questions, but it gives us these massive data points. Now the thing that we the biggest trend we saw actually was that the demographic of the workforce, if you like, or the gig expert crowd, were made up of about 5 categories actually. So you had stay-at-home parents, students, retirees, professional gig workers, and you also had this sort of other weird one, which was maybe the moonlighters. If you go back to that, they're actually commuters, so they're going to their fixed job and they've got an hour and a half, 2 hours commute each way sort of thing. They're earning money on the go. But the ones that we see the most prolific use of are the first 3 categories. They're the ones that are really dominant in our world. So that's the stay-at-home parents. That's the one that I look at that, and that makes me warm inside, because having 2 young children myself, and what the difficulties can be with not just the predictability of childcare, but more importantly the unpredictability, right? And having the ability to and often what can happen with that, the other thing that we've seen is that it's about self-worth, right? Because people generally want to contribute, they want to earn, and they want to be able to deliver something. But when the only option available to them is, fixed, rigid hours that are often non-complementary to looking after kids, especially very young kids.
Look, and I was on a call, a podcast yesterday, and we were talking specifically about moms re-entering the workforce.
Right.
Someone who took time off to care for their kids, and now I see more and more dads staying at home, and they're one day going to face. Companies aren't looking at them, and it doesn't matter what companies try to put on their PR teams, put on the website, and all of this stuff. When they're competing, and there's a gap in your resume. There's somebody else who is there working, who has the experience. And so, the idea that there are stay-at-home parents, that there are people that are retired, in tech, look, you age out of tech. There's an article that I'm going to write on this idea of, there aren't a lot of people over 60 working in tech. Right. My dad was lucky enough to get a pension, retire at 65. And so you still have years. And look, let's imagine we all live to 100. You still have years to contribute. And the word that I like to use is relevancy. You want to wake up every day and you want to feel relevant. You want to feel like you've done something that contributed to your point, but also makes you relevant and that you learn. And so, there are big swaths of the population. Just look at the baby boomer generation. Those are very productive groups of people. And the moonlighters, look at the quiet quitting right now. I was on a call with an executive the other day. He goes, man, you should really just go get a bunch of people at Twitter who are all just, clocking it in right now and have a ton of time in their hands. And so this idea that your employees are engaged is just not true. You just go look at the Gallup poll that comes out every year and tracks employee engagement. I think it hovers around, 38% engaged or 40% engaged. And so you have this cognitive surplus. And so when I go and look at, GigCX opportunities or gig economy strategies for companies, and I see the continual focus on the HR policymakers trying to, manage this group of people internally, and the business leaders not looking outside saying, wow, how do I tap into this cognitive surplus that's been created around the world? How do I train it? There was a time in the late 90s when people were getting on planes and going over to China to train people how to make computers, right? China wasn't the beast that it is today. Shenzhen wasn't what it is today.
Yeah.
And over 10 years, you just look at the world as flat. Over 10 years, China became the place where all electronics manufacturing is done. But companies, US companies, call it HP, call it Dell, call it Apple, took time to send people over there and train those workforces, to bring their quality up, to train them how to do testing, to train them how to do very sophisticated manufacturing and chips. And I think that's the part that people don't realize. If you want to get the benefit of it, you can't take your employees and spend a ton of time on, cupcake socials and learning events and giving them all the context and then go over to this other group of people and expect them to operate the same way without investing the training and the context and the way of working differently. And I think companies that are willing to do that, companies that are willing to, create frameworks that work for remote people where anybody could plug in and be productive in a short amount of time, can get the benefit of the cognitive surplus that exists.
So how does, there's that leap of faith there, isn't there? Because it's like, I use really bad analogies all the time, but it's just how my simple brain works. But, in our world this is for me the difference between everyone driving petrol cars and then, they're based upon laws of physics, right? Combustion engines, burning fuel, pistons firing, and that sort of stuff. And that's that's that engine, if you like, has been tinkered with. But that's the comparison there is to do with your structured workforce. You come to work, you sit there, you do the work, that's it, and you tweak them as much as you can. But fundamentally, it's still based upon the same laws of physics. Yep. And then that's been there ever since Henry Ford, right? And maybe we could talk about that because I know it's a fantastic anecdote when we start talking about those. And then you get the electric car, right? It's just different laws of physics. It's a massive mind shift, and those things don't change overnight. And it's like, I drive an electric car. None of my friends until yesterday drove an electric car. Now one of them's got it, and it will just happen. Not because I've got it, I just happen to be bit more pioneering, if you like, in that industry, or my car came up for. But it's that adoption. Then you get that swell. But it's that confidence, and some of it's seeing what others do, but it's also just that we've got to try something different. And it's when there was I don't know if you get something similar across the pond, but there's a like a politics news show that we have here called Panorama, right? And they had it was about a year and a half ago. So they had members of the parliament, trade unions in this panel, and then the host was talking about gig as a workforce, and everybody on that panel was saying how bad it was, bad for the economy, bad for stimulation, bad for education, bad. And then you turn to the audience, and people, and the whole audience, and this is the format, right? The audience get their hand up, and then the presenter goes around and gives them these mics, and they were like, I'm a parent. I work. I do this. I do taxi drive, and I do a bit of this because it's convenient for me, and I get it to fit around my other life and that sort of stuff. So, the point I was going to link this back to was companies are waiting to change their mindset into that electric car analogy, but the demand on the other side is moving at such a pace because the amount of people that want to work in this way, that can work in this way, and the legislation hasn't caught up, and it feels like the world's got a bit murky in that space. And then that's causing people to be a bit sort of there's a bit of trepidation about going into that world because of that murkiness that's created, because of risks of co-employment and disguised labor and all these sorts of things. How does a brand adopt a gig mindset move them into that space?
I think the first thing is, where we were 3 years ago to where we are today, with more clarity around the laws and the boundaries in the B2C space, in the B2B space, globally, and the ability to do compliance in a very efficient way, right? To make sure that you're classifying people right. Like, we're light years ahead in 3 years from a technology standpoint, and a little more clarity. The great example I like to use is what's happening to truck drivers who got caught up in the gig law because they're independent workers. And so there's all sorts of challenges around, truck drivers who, by definition, in California, fall under the gig economy law. So it's going to be messy, but the good news is there's progress, and people are figuring it out. I want to lean into your electric car analogy and Henry Ford. The thing that Tesla did was not only create an electric car, a fun electric car that you want to drive, right? But they fundamentally changed the whole owning a car experience. Their NPS is 97. 97. They do very little advertising. And so when you look at how you buy a Tesla, it's either on your phone, on a website, or you can go into their place, but they're just going to shop on a website. The buying experience of a car, until you go through that, has been terrible. There's no one who liked driving lot to lot, dealing with, car dealerships, going into the manager's office, getting that whole process had an NPS, I'm sure, negative NPS.
Yeah.
Right? Then you go and you look at the service model. They do mobile servicing. They have an app where you go and talk to the service people. The other day, I took my car in, and I didn't have to talk to a single person. I put my keys in a box. They gave me an Uber credit, $100 a day. And then they texted me when it was ready, and the keys were in the trunk. And so revolutionizing the entire experience and making it pleasurable is what Tesla is bringing to the market. Oh, by the way, it happens to be an electric car and that kind of innovation. I think when companies look at their experience and they look at, from end to end, there's an article I just posted today on LinkedIn about product-led growth and the challenges that companies are having of saying, well, here's my features, here's my content. A customer success rep's going to call you. They're going to keep calling you, and none of that helps me accomplish what I'm trying to do. And so I think we're starting to see companies embrace what does an end-to-end experience look like, starting with the customer and working backwards. And I happen to live in Seattle and have spent some time at Amazon, and it's part of their religion. It's not just something on their strategy thing, customer first. It's where they start. And that's how things, if you want to talk about a company that has a gig mindset, whether it's experts in AWS with AWS IQ, whether it's flex drivers doing last mile delivery, whether it's Mechanical Turk, they have all over their ecosystem. They have embraced this idea of, hey, sometimes it takes humans to deliver that amazing experience. And those humans don't need to be employees of our company. We will create ways for anyone to participate so we can deliver that end customer experience. And I think companies are starting to realize that. And by the way, the companies who adopt the mindset are extremely successful.
Well, I mean, we see that, as you hopefully expect, but I think the difference there is so what we create is brands to have. So I remember, going back to my first ever job, right, which was in a contact center, and it was just, I had no relationship with the brand. I didn't buy from that brand. I actually bought from a competitor's brand, right? And I wonder, if you walked into a modern day contact center today, in-source or outsource, and said, by the way, who here has actually got the products that you're giving service about? Obviously I don't want to generalize, but the model that we're empowering organizations to do is to focus on their customer base. They've already chosen them. Yeah. So, like you say, NPS for Tesla 96. So if someone said to you, would you recommend a Tesla? Hell yeah, I'm sure. Right?
Somebody doesn't have to ask me. That's the difference. You get into the NPS ranges above 80, above 85. Those people are outselling for you. It's not a question of, oh, do you like this thing? I'm an advocate, and that's what I love about your website and the approach that you guys are taking at Limitless. I'm a brand advocate. That advocacy means I'm proactive in being excited about your brand, wanting your brand to be successful, and trying to help you because I get the value. I feel part of your brand. Apple people are the same way. You know, you're not going to rip an iPhone out of someone's dead hands. It's that kind of brand advocacy. And so if you look at any kind of funnel that anyone wants to drive, the goal is to create brand advocates. What they don't realize is that they have to your point about the gas car, stop tinkering with the car and deliver a better experience.
Yeah.
If you don't do that, no matter how many funnels you fix, no matter how much content you put out in the world, no matter how many customer success reps you have, it's going to be incremental. And so we're seeing more and more companies sort of cut through the noise and be like, look, let's start with what the customer, the user is trying to accomplish, the customer is trying to accomplish, and then let's work backwards and find innovative ways to deliver that experience. I think that's the promise of what's going on now, and Limitless is a great example of that.
Paul, so we I think we're going to need to do a part 2, because I mean we could talk for hours. We're going to try and keep this about half an hour, and we're probably already well over. There was one thing you mentioned earlier that I know you want to talk about. So we're just going to move a little bit into that, just to sort of to wrap. Is about how you feel. You talked about diversity and inclusion, right? So how do you feel that gig enables? You know, that's on a huge bow wave, right? And it's political, it's a bit of a minefield, but there is huge sensitivities around it. How does gig enable organizations to adopt a better approach towards that?
I'll tell you a quick story, and I'll let you link to the article I did in Fast Company before the pandemic that talked about this. I was on stage at a big conference. Room had about 800 people, and I asked a question: how many people in the audience have a diversity and inclusion policy or effort at their company? And everybody enthusiastically raised their hands. They were excited. And I said, how many people, and then remember, this is pre-pandemic, how many people have a remote policy? Every hand but a handful went down. And I just fundamentally, and in that moment, said, then you don't have a diversity and inclusion program. You don't. Reaching out in this way to independent workers, through gig platforms or any other way, teaching your company how to work remotely with diverse people is the hard work you need to do. It's not compliance training. It's not a bunch of PR things where you change your marketing and the people look different. I really, and I called it location bias. Like, companies need to be able to start reaching out to people where they are, whether they're mothers, whether they're African American, whether they're disabled. Like, it was just important. And so if you didn't have at that time a remote policy, again, pre-pandemic, it was just lip service. You had a compliance program that the HR people put forward, and maybe your marketing was starting to get a little more inclusive. But companies have to start going to where the workers are, whether that is somebody fully employed or whether that's somebody in an underserved place that's not 50 miles from your campus. So that's my point of view, and I wrote about it in my Fast Company article. And
then pandemics kind of forced people to get into that in more detail, right?
I think in some ways it has. In some ways, it takes a business leader to go and say, hey, we're going to do this.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's easy to check the box with the HR compliance training. Hey, if everybody's trained and we kind of get our numbers up a little bit and make some different choices, it's easy to pay lip service to. I think it takes a business leader in a line of business to go and say, hey, this is the right thing to do, not only for society, not only for our company, but it'll drive our business forward. Full stop. Every study you read says that diversity of thought in general, gender and ethnic diversity leads to better outcomes.
Yeah.
Every study, you pick a top tier university and a bunch of smart academics who've done studies, and that's what it says. And so it takes a business leader to go and do that.
Well, let's hope there's some business leaders on this again. Do you know what? We're going to do this. But anyway, that's my unashamed plug at the end. So we're going to run out of time, but we're going to need to do a part 2. Maybe we'll pick some particular topics and we'll go through it. But this is all about giving people more education, different perspectives, so it doesn't just feel like it's a big sort of sales journey and stuff. We've all got our points of view on this sort of stuff. It's fantastic to hear yours. There'll be show notes for those from links into some of your articles, and there's a massive plethora out there. It's just too much. I was doing my research for this. I was like, it's too much, Paul, out there. But if anyone's more interested, you can go on to limitlesstech.com. You can download the gig report there. I promise you, it's not a sales brochure. It's an honest and genuine perspective of the industry, what's driving it from all aspects. The clients that have done it, the industry leaders, as well as the experts themselves, all given their perspectives in an unbiased way. But so thank you again, Paul, for an amazing discussion. We're going to wrap up there, and stay tuned, folks, for the next one as we work our way through the panel of experts who all contributed to the report, and hopefully we'll bring you some more insights and education. But for now, that's it. Goodbye. Thank you again, Paul, and we hope to talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Cheers, Paul.